I thought the worst day of my life was when I buried my husband, but I was wrong. The worst day was this morning, when I listened to a police scanner and heard a crime scene description that I had typed out on a MacBook 3 years ago. Word for word, except back then, we called it a rough draft. The coffee in my mug had gone completely cold, a greasy film forming on the surface. But my hand just wouldn't let go of the handle. My knuckles were chalk white. On the monitor, the audio waveform of the local police feed was a jagged line of neon green pulsing against the dark screen. The dispatcher's voice had that flat, nasal Midwestern drone, the kind used by people who handle trauma for $12 an hour. She said the victim was found in a detached garage on 4th Street. She said the wrists were bound with yellow nylon twine, tied in a triple-loop clove hitch. My breath caught in the back of my throat, tasting like stale acid. A clove hitch. Not a zip tie. Not a handcuffs. Yellow nylon twine. 3 years ago, Liam sat right where I'm sitting now, chewing on the cap of a pilot pen, until his lips were stained black. He was a fiction writer who never quite made it, a man who built labyrinthine plots in his head, but couldn't remember to pay the water bill on time. He spent 8 months on a manuscript called The Third Persona. It was about a killer who left zero forensic evidence because he operated like a ghost, treating every crime scene like a meticulous stage production. Liam made me type it because his fingers were too stiff from arthritis. I remember the exact weight of those words hitting the mechanical keyboard. I remember arguing with him about the twine. I told him it was too specific, too theatrical. He just smiled, that slow, crooked grin that used to make my chest ache, and said, "That's the point, Nora. The details are what make it real." Then Liam's heart stopped on a Tuesday afternoon while he was buying groceries, and the manuscript stayed on a corrupted hard drive in the bottom drawer of our filing cabinet. Or so I thought. The police scanner rattled again, static cutting through the quiet of my basement office. The field officer on the scene was breathing hard, his boots crunching over shattered glass. "Dispatch, be advised. We have a secondary marking on the victim's left instep. It looks like a Roman numeral 3, carved with a serrated blade. Depth is shallow. Minimal bleeding post-mortem." My mouse hovered over the file directory. My fingers were shaking so violently, I clicked the wrong folder twice before I found the archive. My teeth clicked together, a sharp, rhythmic chattering I couldn't stop. I opened the document titled Persona Draft Final Docs. I scrolled down to page 42. My eyes burned as I read the lines I had typed, while Liam drank black coffee and paced behind my chair. The blade must be serrated to prevent the skin from sealing back together during the initial cooling of the body. The numeral 3 on the left instep signifies the completion of the first phase. The room felt entirely devoid of oxygen. The walls, lined with the acoustic foam panels I bought for my true crime podcast, seemed to be leaning inward, pressing the air straight out of my lungs. My podcast is called Dead Files Unlocked. I spend 40 hours a week talking into a high-end microphone about dead girls and the monsters who put them in ditches. I know the anatomy of a murder. I know how copycats work. They watch the news. They read the tabloids. They mimic the gruesome highlights to get their own 15 minutes of sick infamy. But this manuscript had never been published. It hadn't been sent to an agent. It hadn't even been backed up to the cloud because Liam was paranoid about people stealing his ideas. It existed only on this machine and on a single thumb drive that Liam kept on his keychain that was handed back to me by the hospital orderly in a clear plastic baggie labeled Effects of the Deceased. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over my father's contact name. He's a retired detective from the county homicide squad. The man who taught me how to look at a blood splatter pattern before I even learned how to drive a car. When Liam was alive, The two of them would sit on the back porch for hours, a bottle of cheap bourbon between them, talking about the mechanics of death. My father would give him the real-world grit, and Liam would turn it into art. I stared at the screen until the backlight dimmed to black, reflecting the hollowed-out expression on my own face. The police hadn't released the details of the twine to the press. They hadn't mentioned the Roman numeral on the news. I checked 3 different local outlets. They only had a 2-paragraph blurb about a suspicious death on the east side. That meant whoever did this didn't read Liam's script. They lived it, or they helped write it. The phone in my hand suddenly vibrated, a sharp, aggressive buzz that made me drop it onto the desk. The caller ID flashed against the wood. It was my father. The vibration of the phone against the wood. The vibration of the phone against the wood, hitting a nerve. I didn't pick it up on the first ring, or the second. I just stared at his name, Dad, flashing in white block letters, while the police scanner in the background faded into a low, rhythmic hum of code numbers and street addresses. When I finally pressed the screen, I didn't say hello. I just put the phone to my ear and waited. Nora. You there, kiddo? His voice was thick, gravelly, from 40 years of unfiltered camels and screaming over sirens. It was the same voice that used to read me bedtime stories about missing persons cases when I was 10, treating the grisly details like logic puzzles to sharpen my mind. Yeah, Dad. I'm here. My voice sounded thin, like paper tearing. You sound like hell, he said. A lighter clicked on his end of the line, the distinct clink of a Zippo, followed by a long, slow exhale. You checking out that mess over on 4th Street? I know you keep that scanner on while you work. My eyes flicked back to the glowing monitor, to page 42 of Liam's script. The blade must be serrated. I heard a few minutes of it, I said. My teeth clenched so tight my jaw ached. Just standard domestic stuff, right? A beat of silence hung over the line. Too long? The kind of silence my father used to use in interrogation rooms to make suspects fill the void with a confession. Not exactly, he muttered, his tone dropping into that professional hushed register he used when he was standing inside a cordoned-off perimeter. It's messy, Nora. Real messy. The boys on the active squad are running around like headless chickens. They don't make 'em like they used to. They missed the mark on the foot entirely until the medical examiner pointed it out. My stomach dropped, a cold, heavy weight plunking down into my gut. The mark? Yeah. Some sick bastard left a signature. Listen, the reason I'm calling. I left my good reading glasses over at your place when I helped you move Liam's old desk out of the study last weekend. You mind checking the top drawer for me? My gaze drifted slowly toward the heavy oak desk in the corner of my basement. The drawers were still locked. The key was sitting right next to my mouse. Sure, I whispered, the word catching in my throat. I'll look for them. Good girl. Don't work too late on that podcast. Some stories are better left buried. The line went dead. I sat in the silence of the basement, the skin on the back of my neck prickling, as if someone were standing right behind me, breathing down my collar. Some stories are better left buried. He had used that exact phrase on the porch with Liam 2 summers ago. I remembered because Liam had written it down on a napkin. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead, and walked over to Liam's old desk. It smelled like him. Cedar, stale tobacco, and old paper. I slid the small brass key into the lock of the top drawer and turned it. It gave a sharp, metallic click. I pulled the drawer open. There were no reading glasses. Instead, tucked neatly beneath a stack of blank yellow legal pads, was a brand new box of heavy-duty, bright yellow nylon twine, and right next to it, resting on the dark wood, was a vintage, military-grade survival knife with a heavy, black, serrated blade. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I touched the cold steel of the hilt. It was coated in a thin layer of clear mineral oil, the kind my father used to preserve his service weapons. Then I saw the small piece of paper trapped underneath the knife. It was a receipt from a local hardware store, dated 3 days ago, paid in cash. But it wasn't the date that made my breath completely stop. It was the handwriting at the bottom of the slip, a sloppy, hurried scrawl testing a pen to see if it worked. It was a single Roman numeral. The receipt felt heavy, like lead in my palm. The ink of that scrawled 3 was slightly raised against the cheap thermal paper. I stared at it until the numbers blurred into 3 black bars. A tiny cage holding everything I thought I knew about my life. My father hadn't left his glasses. He had left a breadcrumb trail or a warning. I dropped the receipt back into the drawer and slammed it shut, the sound echoing off the concrete walls of the basement like a gunshot. The metal latch rattled, then settled into a dead quiet. I needed to get out of the house. The acoustic foam on the walls suddenly felt like it was absorbing all the oxygen, trapping me in a vacuum, where the only sound was my own jagged breathing. I grabbed my car keys and my coat, not even bothering to turn off the monitor, as I backed out of the driveway. The sky over the city was the color of a bruised iris, heavy with dark clouds that threatened a late summer downpour. I didn't think about where I was driving until I hit the intersection of 4th and Elm. The blue and red strobes of the police cruisers cut through the dusk, casting rhythmic, violent shadows against the brick face of the detached garage. A yellow strip of crime scene tape stretched across the driveway, fluttering weakly in the damp wind. A small crowd of neighbors stood on the opposite sidewalk, their faces illuminated by the eerie glow of their smartphones, watching 2 men in white Tyvek suits wheel a heavy black vinyl bag toward a waiting ambulance. I parked a block away, under the dying branches of an old oak tree, and kept the engine running. My father's old Crown Victoria wasn't there. He was retired. He had no official business at a live scene. But as I scanned the perimeter, my chest tightened. Standing just outside the glare of the floodlights, leaning against a chain-link fence with his hands shoved deep into his pockets, was Detective Miller. He was my father's former partner, the guy who took over the squad when my dad hung up his badge. Miller was looking straight at my car. He didn't move for 3 long seconds. Then he tossed his cigarette butt onto the wet pavement, crushed it with the heel of his boot, and began walking toward me, his heavy leather jacket creaking with every step. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic, trapped bird. I put my hand on the gear shift, ready to slam it into reverse, but before I could, Miller reached my window and tapped on the glass with his gold wedding band. Clink, clink. I rolled it down an inch, the smell of damp asphalt and ozone filling the cabin. "Nora," Miller said, his voice flat, completely stripped of the casual warmth he usually had when he came over for Sunday barbecues. He didn't look at my eyes. He looked at my hands, which were still gripping the steering wheel like I was trying to rip it off the column. "What are you doing out here? I heard it on the wire." I lied, my voice cracking slightly. I thought it might be something for the show." Miller leaned down, his face inches from the glass. I could smell the stale coffee and wintergreen mints on his breath. He hooked his thumbs into his belt, right next to his badge. "Go home, Nora," he said, his tone dropping into a low, dangerous whisper that made the hair on my arms stand up. "This isn't one of your internet bedtime stories. And if your old man calls you tonight, you tell him the forensic unit found the hair, the gray one, under the victim's fingernails. They're rushing the panel right now." He tapped the roof of my car twice, a dismissive, heavy thud, and turned back toward the light. The drive back to the house was a blur of wipers slapping against the windshield and the oncoming headlights smearing across the wet glass. Miller's words kept looping in my brain. A short, violent tape on repeat. The gray hair under the fingernails. My father kept his hair cut close to the scalp, a silver buzz cut that he touched up every 2 weeks with a pair of wall clippers in the bathroom. He was meticulous. He never left DNA. When I was a kid, he used to tell me that a good detective could read a room like a book, but a great criminal didn't leave a single letter behind to read. When I pulled back into the driveway, the house looked dark, dead, and entirely foreign. I didn't turn off the headlights. The twin beams cut through the heavy downpour, illuminating the front porch and the peeling white paint on the front door. Sitting right there on the top step, completely indifferent to the rain soaking through his canvas jacket, was my father. He didn't move as I killed the engine. He just sat there, a dark silhouette against the dark wood, his hands resting on his knees. I got out of the car, my boots splashing into a deep puddle. The rain hit my face, cold and sharp, but my skin felt hot, like I was burning up from the inside. I walked up the porch steps, my heart thumping a heavy, erratic rhythm against my ribs. He didn't look up until I stood on the step below him. His eyes were bloodshot, the deep lines around his mouth carved deeper by the shadows of the porch light. "You went down there," he said. It wasn't a question. "Miller told me to tell you something," I said, my voice shaking so hard I had to anchor my hands in my coat pockets. "He said they found a hair. A gray one. Under her fingernails." He just reached into his breast pocket, pulled out his silver Zippo, and flicked the wheel. The orange flame lit up the hollows of his cheeks for a second, before the wind blew it out. He closed the lighter with a sharp click. "Miller always was a talker," he murmured, his voice completely level, too level. "That's why he never made captain. He lets his mouth get ahead of his eyes." "Dad, what did you do?" The words finally broke out of me, raw and suffocating. The twine, the knife in Liam's desk. "It's page 42. You sat on that porch, and you took everything he wrote. And I didn't take anything from Liam." "Nora," he interrupted. Standing up slowly, he towered over me, his massive frame blocking the little light coming from the street lamp. He reached out and placed a heavy, calloused hand on my shoulder. His palm was damp from the rain, but his grip was tight, unyielding. "Liam didn't invent that story, kiddo," he whispered, his breath smelling of tobacco and copper. "He just wrote down what I told him. He was supposed to change the details. That was the deal. But your husband got lazy. He kept the truth exactly where it belonged, in the dark." He leaned in closer, his grip tightening until it hurt. "The girl in that garage tonight, she wasn't a stranger, Nora. She was the reason your husband's heart stopped 3 years ago. Now go inside. We need to talk about what happens next." The door to the house felt like the entrance to a vault as it swung open. Inside, the air was warm, smelling faintly of the lavender detergent I'd used on the rugs last week. A mundane, domestic scent that felt completely grotesque, given the weight of the man stepping in behind me. My father didn't take off his boots. He left wet, muddy tracks across the hardwood floor, straight into the kitchen. He pulled out a chair at the small dining table, the wood scraping against the tile with a high, agonizing screech, and sat down. I stayed by the counter, keeping the kitchen island between us like a barrier. My hands were shoved so deep into my pockets that the fabric was tearing at the seams. "What do you mean? She's the reason his heart stopped?" I asked. The words taste like copper in my mouth. "Liam died of an aneurysm. The doctors read a chart, Nora. I read people." He cut me off, his heavy hands flat on the table. He looked down at them, tracing a scar across his knuckle. "Your husband owed $40,000 to people who don't send past due notices. He used my name to secure the line. My name Nora. In this town that carries weight, or at least it used to. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, a low, vibrating drone that made my teeth ache. The girl in the garage, my father continued, his eyes flicking up to meet mine, cold and unblinking. Her name was Absolute Poison. She was the one holding the paper. She didn't just want the money. She wanted a detective on her payroll. She thought she could squeeze him, and by extension squeeze me. Liam couldn't handle the pressure. His brain literally gave out under the weight of his own stupidity. I felt the room tilt slightly. The edges of my vision went fuzzy. Liam hadn't been a struggling artist who just forgot to pay the water bill. He was a gambler, a liar. A liar? So you killed her. My voice was barely a whisper, a tiny scratch of sound in a quiet kitchen. To protect your name? To protect your name? My father let out a short, dry bark of a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. I didn't kill her for my name, kiddo. And I didn't kill her according to Liam's script. You've got the timeline backward. He leaned forward, his massive chest pressing against the edge of the table. The shadow of his chin stretched across the wood, sharp and dark. Liam didn't write a fiction piece, Nora. He was writing a confession. My confession from a case back in '98. The one the department buried so deep it hit bedrock. He stole my old case notes from the basement while you were out at the grocery store. He thought if he turned it into a novel, he could sell it, pay off his debts, and clean his hands. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, transparent plastic baggie. Inside was a silver thumb drive, the one Liam always kept on his keychain. The one the hospital orderly was supposed to have given back to me. Your husband wasn't a genius, Nora, he whispered, sliding the drive across the table. It made a tiny plastic clink against the wood, stopping right at the edge of the island. He was a thief. And tonight, I didn't just kill a blackmailer. I cleaned up his final draft. Now the only question left is, what are you going to do with the audio file you recorded on your computer 40 minutes ago? My heart stopped. My phone was in my pocket, still hot from the call, but my hand automatically flicked toward my keys. In my rush to leave the basement, I hadn't just left the monitor on. I'd left the studio microphone live, streaming the police scanner, and my own audio feed, straight to the secure backup server for my podcast. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. My hand froze inside my coat pocket, my fingers curled around the smooth glass of my phone. My father didn't move. He didn't reach for his weapon. He just sat there, watching me with the practiced patience of a predator that had already mapped out every exit in the room. He knew exactly what my setup down there did. He'd helped me run the XLR cables through the drywall when I first started the show. You think you're the only one who listens, Nora? He asked, his voice dropping into a low, conversational tone that sent a violent shiver straight down my spine. Every time you hit record in that basement, it pings the local node. I've had a ghost tap on your server since the day you went live. I like to hear my little girl talk. A wave of intense nausea hit me, hot and sour. The studio wasn't my sanctuary. It was a wiretap. Why? The syllable forced its way out of my throat, small and broken. Why do this to me? If you knew Liam was stealing from you, why didn't you stop him? Because Liam was weak. But he wasn't stupid, my father said, standing up from the table. He didn't rush. He walked around the kitchen island, his heavy boots clicking rhythmically against the tile, until he was standing less than 2 feet away from me. I could smell the rain on his wool jacket, mixed with the faint metallic tang of gun oil. He knew that if he died, the manuscript would be the only thing left to protect you. He told me if anything ever happened to him, the file would auto-publish to a blind server if I didn't keep paying his people. He reached out, his thick fingers gently gripping my chin, forcing me to look up into his eyes. They were completely devoid of warmth. Just two chips of gray flint staring back at me. But Liam's dead now. The girl on 4th Street is dead. And that backup server you're thinking about? The one you think is recording us right now? He smiled, a tiny, terrible tightening of his lips. Take your phone out, Nora. Look at the network connection. With trembling fingers, I pulled the phone from my pocket and tapped the screen. The signal bar at the top was completely empty. No 5G. No Wi-Fi. Just a blinking red icon indicating a total hardware jam. He hadn't just walked onto my porch. He had brought a tactical cell jammer into my driveway. There is no file, kiddo, he whispered, his thumb pressing firmly against my jawline, just enough to let me feel the immense physical strength he still possessed. The mic in the basement is talking to a dead wall. You and me. We're the only ones left in the editing room. And we need to make sure the final cut is clean. He let go of my face and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, folded piece of paper. He laid it flat on the counter between us. It was a page torn from a notepad. In his neat, blocky handwriting, there was a list of 3 names. The first name was the girl from the garage. It had a neat black line drawn straight through it. The second name on the list was Detective Miller. I stared at Miller's name on that cheap paper, the black ink cutting through his identity like a neat surgical incision. My breath came in short, shallow gasps that barely filled my chest. Miller is your friend, I whispered, the words choking me. He covered for you tonight. He told me about the hair so I could warn you. Miller isn't covering for me, Nora. He's measuring me for a coffin, my father said, his voice flat, completely stripped of any human emotion. He leaned his hips against the kitchen counter, crossing his arms over his chest. He didn't give you that tip out of the goodness of his heart. He gave it to you because he wanted to see if you'd run straight to your old man. He used my own daughter as a biological marker to confirm his suspect. The kitchen clock ticked, a loud, heavy tock-tock-tock that sounded like a countdown. He's been building a file on me for 2 years, my father continued, staring at the cabinet doors behind me as if he were looking right through them. Ever since Liam died, Miller's been digging up the 98 case. He thinks I'm sloppy. He thinks because my hands shake a little when I pour my coffee that I've lost my edge. Tonight was a trap and Liam's script gave him the blueprints to set it. Then let him have it, I blurted out, taking a step back until my spine hit the refrigerator. The cold metal bled through my wet shirt. Turn yourself in, Dad. You're 70 years old. If you tell them about the blackmail, about Liam, and what happens to your little show, Nora? The question hit me like a physical blow. He leaned forward, his face inches from mine again, his eyes widening just a fraction. It was the look he used to get right before he broke a guy in the box. You think the state police care about a dead gambler's debts? If I go down, the 98 file comes out in full public view. Every single piece of evidence I suppressed to keep this family afloat gets dragged into court. The money Liam used for your podcast equipment? The down payment on this very house? It all came from the same dirty bucket, kiddo. They won't just arrest me. They'll asset freeze you into bankruptcy before my first arraignment. My hands felt completely numb. I looked down at the kitchen island, at the silver thumb drive resting there like a tiny metallic bullet. My whole life, my career, my home, the memory of my husband, was a beautifully constructed stage prop built on top of a mass grave. So what's the third name? I asked, my voice dropping into a dead, hollow register. My eyes moved to the bottom of the notepad, where the third line of text remained hidden under his thick thumb. My father slowly lifted his hand, revealing the final scrawl on the page. It wasn't a name. It was an address. 1142 Oak Ridge Lane, my studio, my house. Miller knows about the manuscript, Nora, my father whispered, his hand sliding into his jacket pocket, his fingers wrapping around something heavy that didn't sound like a lighter. He knows Liam wrote it here. And right now he's pulling a warrant for this basement. The sound of the rain outside seemed to amplify, a heavy, rhythmic drumming that felt like it was trying to smash through the roof. 1142 Oak Ridge Lane. My own address, written in his cold, precise block letters. He's pulling a warrant, I repeated, the words rolling off my tongue like sand. If he comes here, he finds the twine. He finds the survival knife in Liam's desk. He finds everything you planted. I didn't plant it to frame you, Nora, my father said, his voice dropping into that terrifyingly soft paternal tone he used. When I was a little girl and had skinned my knee, he reached out, his hand hovering near my face, but I flinched away, my skull hitting the cold refrigerator door with a dull thud. His hand dropped back to his side, unbothered. I put it there because this is the last place Miller would think to look before he gets his paperwork signed. He thinks I'm hiding the tools of the trade in my garage. He doesn't know I brought them to the archive. He stepped closer, completely invading my space, blocking out the light from the hallway. But Miller is smart. He'll realize it soon. When he gets here, he can't find that knife, Nora. And he can't find you looking like a guilty suspect. What are you saying? My heart was beating so hard I could see the fabric of my wet coat jumping over my chest. I'm saying you need to do a special episode, he whispered. His eyes gleamed with a sudden, frantic energy that made me realize, with absolute certainty, that the man standing in front of me was completely gone. Only the detective remained. You're going to use that microphone down there. The jammer stays on for the outside world, but I'm going to patch you into a local line. You're going to call Miller. On tape, he reached into his pocket and didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out a small, black digital recorder, the old-school kind cops used before smartphones took over. He pressed play. A voice filled the small space between us. It was Miller's voice, but it was choppy, edited, the syllables stitched together with terrifying precision. Nora. I shouldn't have done it. The girl on 4th Street. She wouldn't stop screaming. I had to use the twine, my stomach completely inverted. He hadn't just been tracking Miller. He had been harvesting his voice, syllable by syllable, from old phone calls, radio transmissions, and retirement parties, cutting them into a digital confession. Just like Liam had cut up his case notes. You're going to call him, my father said, his face tightening into a hard, unbreakable mask. You're going to sound terrified. You're going to tell him you found something in Liam's files that links him to the 98 case. When he gets here to silence you, the line will be open, and I will be waiting behind the door. He thrust the small recorder into my hand. It felt ice cold against my palm. It's page 71, Nora. The climax of Liam's little book. The hunter becomes the prey in the basement. It's time to read your lines. The stairs leading down to the basement felt like they were dropping straight into a well. Every wooden tread groaned under my weight, the sound amplified by the tight concrete stairwell. My father walked right behind me, his shadow stretching long and distorted across the white drywall, swallowing mine completely. The air in the studio was freezing now. The HVAC unit had kicked off, leaving a dead, heavy chill that smelled faintly of old carpet and electronics. On my desk, the dual monitors still glowed with that neon green audio waveform from the police scanner. A jagged line of frozen sound. Sit down, my father murmured, his hand settling onto my shoulder to push me into the mesh office chair. His fingers dug right into the muscle, a reminder of the physical reality behind the script. I sat. My knees clicked against the underside of the desk. He reached over my shoulder, his thick, scarred thumb flipping the toggle switch on the small black cell jammer he'd placed next to my keyboard. The blinking red light turned a solid, venomous amber. He then plugged a patch cable directly from his digital recorder into my mixing board, his movements smooth and practiced. The muscle memory of a man who spent his life manipulating audio tapes in evidence rooms. "The line is active," he said, tapping the glass of my phone, which was now hardwired into the mixing desk through an auxiliary line. "When Miller answers, you play the scared daughter. You tell him you looked in the drawer like he said. You tell him you found his name in the manuscript." I stared at the heavy condenser microphone hanging from its boom arm. The metal pop filter looked like a tiny dark shield reflecting the glow of the screen. "And if I don't?" My voice didn't even sound like mine anymore. It was hollow, completely empty of fluid. My father didn't answer with words. He just reached into his coat and pulled out the vintage survival knife from Liam's desk. He didn't point it at me. He just laid it gently on the edge of the desk, right next to my mouse, the heavy serrated edge catching the green light of the monitor. "You're a good storyteller, Nora," he whispered, stepping back into the dark corner of the room, just behind the acoustic foam panels where the shadow was deepest. "Make it believable." My fingers felt like sticks of chalk as I unlocked the phone and dialed Miller's direct line. I hit the speakerphone button on the board. The ringtone was incredibly loud in the small room, a mechanical bipe. Bipe, bipe. That rattled the diaphragm of the microphone. On the fourth ring, the line clicked open. "Nora?" Miller's voice was sharp, accompanied by the heavy thud-thud of windshield wipers in the background. He was driving. "I told you to go home. Why are you calling me on a secured line?" I looked at the knife on the desk. I looked at the dark corner where my father stood, a motionless silhouette against the wall. I took a deep, ragged breath, letting the genuine suffocating terror in my chest flood into my vocal cords. "Miller, you were right," I sobbed, my hands shaking so hard I had to grip the edges of the desk to stay upright. I came back. I looked in the desk like my dad said. It has the 98 case notes, Miller. Your signature is all over the property disposal logs for the evidence." The line went dead silent, save for the rhythmic slapping of his wipers. "Nora, listen to me very carefully," Miller said, his tone shifting from professional annoyance to a cold, hard authority. "Do not touch anything else. Stay exactly where you are. I'm turning the car around." "He's coming here, Miller," I cried, the tears hot and real on my cheeks now. "My dad, he knows you're digging. He has a list." "I know he has a list, Nora." Miller cut me off, his voice cracking with an urgency that made my father shift slightly in the shadows. "Because I didn't find that gray hair on the victim tonight. The lab did. And it didn't match your father." My hand froze over the digital recorder's play button. "The DNA profile came back 20 minutes ago." Kiddo Miller's voice echoed through the studio monitors, rattling the glass. "The skin under that dead girl's fingernails. It belongs to a male relative. A direct descendant. Your father was overseas in '98, Nora. But your brother wasn't." Before the words could fully process in my brain, the solid amber light on the cell jammer on my desk suddenly flickered. It didn't turn green. It turned blue. A tiny digital notification popped up on my secondary monitor, completely overriding the police scanner. It was a secure network connection confirmation from the backup server. The jammer hadn't failed. Someone had overridden it from inside the house. From the top of the basement stairs, the heavy oak door creaked open, and the sound of someone walking down the steps, light, hurried, and wearing sneakers, echoed through the floorboards above my head. The footsteps on the stairs didn't sound like a cop's heavy boots. They were light, dragging slightly, the rhythmic squeak-squeak of wet rubber soles against the wood. My eyes darted to the dark corner where my father stood. The silhouette of his massive frame didn't flinch, but I saw his hand tighten around the hilt of the survival knife until the leather of his glove groaned. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring at the doorway. Nora! Miller's voice was still coming through the speakerphone, a tinny, desperate scratch. Get out of the house, now. Your dad didn't kill anyone. He's been covering for... I hit the kill switch on the mixing board. The line went dead. The silence that rushed back into the room was absolute, heavy enough to make my ears ring. The sneakers stopped at the bottom of the stairs, right where the fluorescent light from the studio spilled out into the concrete hallway. A figure stepped into the doorway, dripping wet, a yellow raincoat thrown over his shoulders. It was Leo. My little brother. He looked exactly like he did when we were kids, pale, thin, with that nervous twitch under his left eye that always flared up when he got caught breaking something. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a boy who had outgrown his clothes but couldn't outrun his skin. You always did keep this place too cold, Nora? Leo said, his voice flat, completely hollowed out. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the secondary monitor, where the blue network connection icon was still pulsing. I had to use the master override from the router upstairs. Dad's jammer is old tech. Commercial grade. It doesn't hold up against a modern script. Leo, I whispered, my hands falling off the desk, dead weight in my lap. What did you do? I fixed it, he said, taking a slow step into the room. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't need one. He just had a black tablet in his hand, the screen glowing with a live directory of my podcast's cloud server. Liam was going to sell the 98 notes to a true crime network in Chicago, Nora. He was going to put my face on a billboard. He thought because he was family, because he married you, that he could use my mistake to buy his way out of his gambling debts. My mind fractured, the pieces spinning into a sickening new alignment. The 98 case. The girl on 4th Street. It wasn't my father's confession. It was Leo's. And my father hadn't been hunting a blackmailer to protect his own legacy. He had been executing them to protect his only son. He didn't die of an aneurysm, did he? I looked past Leo into the dark corner where my father still stood like a stone monument. Liam, you told me his heart just stopped. It did stop. My father's voice boomed from the shadows, thick with a deep, systemic exhaustion. He stepped out into the light, the serrated blade swinging low at his hip. He didn't look at me. He looked at Leo with a mixture of profound disgust and unconditional, terrifying devotion. I gave him the digitalis myself, Nora. In his coffee. On that porch. I did it because your brother didn't have the stomach to clean up his own mess back then. And I did it to keep your name out of the dirt. Leo let out a dry, rattling laugh, his eyes fixed on my monitor. But Dad got old. He got sloppy. He left that girl on 4th Street alive long enough to talk to Miller. I had to finish it tonight. Exactly how Liam wrote it. I thought if it looked like the script, the state cops would think it was one of your crazy fans, Nora. A copycat from the podcast. A viral stunt. He tapped the tablet screen once. A progress bar appeared. Uploading file. Persona Final Confession. MP3. What is that? I screamed, lunging across the desk toward the monitor. But my father's hand came down on my shoulder, heavy as an anvil, pinning me to the chair. It's the tape from your mixing board, kiddo, Leo said, a small tragic smile creeping onto his face. The one where you just confessed to Miller that you found the 98 files in Liam's desk. The one where it sounds like you're the one holding the knife. When Miller gets here, he's going to find a murder-suicide. The tragic podcaster who got too deep into her own husband's dark past. He reached into the pocket of his yellow raincoat and pulled out a small amber glass vial. The same digitalis my father used 3 years ago. Dad's going to take the fall for the girl on 4th Street, Leo whispered, his voice cracking, a single tear cutting through the grime on his cheek. But you and Liam, you two just couldn't leave the story alone. My father didn't move to stop him. His grip on my shoulder remained tight, unyielding, his gray eyes staring down at me with a terrible, silent apology. He wasn't saving me. He had chosen his blood over his daughter a long time ago. The upload bar on the monitor hit 100%. The blue light turned a solid, permanent green. Outside, far in the distance, but growing louder by the second, the first wail of Miller's sirens began to cut through the rain.